to the National Disability Insurance Scheme and claims it's out of control. Some people on the NDIS are receiving as much as $2 million worth of services every year. And that's just for an individual. At the current rate, the cost of the NDIS will reach almost $100 billion within a decade. It already costs more than Medicare and will soon outstrip defence. As such, it's being dubbed a budget black hole. A review last year called for a total rethink of the scheme. The reality is the NDIS now has 600,000 participants. Those with autism and developmental delay account for 45% of participants. No doubt, though, the NDIS has been a positive step forward. Advocates say for every dollar invested in it, it delivers a $2.25 return to the economy. But we are paying a huge price tag for a scheme that is not even means tested. So our question for the jury is the NDIS costing us too much? Joining me now is psychiatrist Dr. Claire Rowe and River Knight, National Disability Sector Advocate and co-founder of Developing Australian Communities. Great to be with you both. Thank you for joining us on the show this evening. River, we're going to start with you. You know this firsthand, you have autism yourself and you are an advocate for the NDIS. Given the cost, can you justify it continuing at its current rate?
Well, it's one of those really, really cool topics because when we hear people talking about it, the rest of Australia doesn't understand how disability works, how mental health services work. So when someone says, oh, some people are getting $2 million a year, like those few people that are getting that, I've worked with those cases and I know that the reason they're in that space is because our system has failed them so absolutely terribly over the years. And that's a tiny, tiny percent. And we choose to support someone at home out of an institutional setting by investing a lot of money into a very small number of people in that sort of situation because we don't want to lock them up. We don't want to euthanize people. We don't want to go into eugenics. We don't want to have an institutional model, or we don't want to put someone in a correctional facility in isolation 24 hours a day where they never leave that space. They're the sorts of people that are receiving those massive funding packages because as a community we want to value those roles. But the thing is we can't afford to not spend money on NDIS because NDIS isn't this new standalone budget. We've had the Royal Commission and what we found in the Royal Commission is not advocates saying please spend the money. It's not me saying please. What we found is the research tells us that the fact that we don't do a really good job with the NDIS, which is a very different topic, we don't do a very good job with social and welfare services in Australia sometimes, it actually costs us $40 to $50 billion a year, just the effects of abuse, neglect, violence and exploitation. That costs us. So even if we didn't have NDIS funding and we didn't fund the NDIS, we are spending $40 to $50 billion a year on the effects of abuse. And older carers, people who are getting that over 65, who have got an adult with a disability in their home, that's costing us $40 to $50 billion a year in lost revenue and lost economic impact.
And that's a lot of money. Yeah. And that's a lot of money. And I think this is a very key point that River makes. You cut costs in the NDIS, but what does that then mean for services? How can we cut back costs, Claire? It's very difficult. How do you cut back costs? But also you need to give the best services to people who need it the most.
We do, and that's the key. So the debate here is the NDIS costing us too much? Of course it is. We know this. We know that it's increasing by 14% a year. Bill Shorten, the Minister for the NDIS, has said it's costing us too much. We need to reduce it. He's aiming for 8% by 2026. And this is not about the people on $1 million plans. These people need round-the-clock care. These people have got ventilators, hospital equipment in their home, and they are a very tiny proportion of people on the NDIS. And they are the people that the NDIS was set up for. It is a very noble, critical scheme in Australia. But the average person on NDIS is, as you said, 45% are people with autism, are on $50,000 a year with their scheme, are completely unregulated pretty much in the services that they're getting. We know there's 1,000% markup sometimes with providers of buying NDIS approved equipment and services. And what a lot of people actually just on the autism side of things don't realise, and our jury probably doesn't realise, is that there is no actual test for autism. It's a professional opinion. And suddenly we have 11% of boys aged between 7 and 11, or 5 and 7, sorry, in our country who have been deemed to be disabled enough that they are on a national disability scheme. I mean, it's outrageous, the bleed of money. And if we don't fix it, and this is the point, if we don't rein it in, our most vulnerable Australians who desperately need this, we do not want the system to collapse for them.
That's absolutely. Let's go to the jury and see how they're feeling about this. Danny, we'll start with you there in the middle. You've also had a personal experience. You know somebody who is on the NDIS. How has it helped them? But also, do you think that we do need to rein the cost in?
Well, it's always that fine line between helping people and balancing, fixed budgets and resources. In my case, it was a recent diagnosis of a family member a couple of years ago, quite a young teenager, and the scheme has just enabled him to come out of his shell a little bit, manage his day-to-day where he was struggling at school, and provide his parents with support that they just wouldn't have been able to, deal with, and not even know where to start. And so I think from that perspective, it's been helpful. But again, the cost is an issue. What's the bureaucracy involved in running this scheme? Is that blowing out? So I think there's variables we need to look at.
Yeah, and River, as Danny said, there's a lot of personal cases, which is also what you said before. Does there need to be a new test to be able to, not necessarily a means test, but a test in terms of disability, and who can actually decide that? Because that is the fine line. That's the difficult part.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the things that happens a lot is, am I disabled enough to get supports? And in Australia, we have this crisis mentality that we don't support people until they're at absolute crisis. And then we all jump in and it costs us 10 times as much. So for me, it's not about, is NDIS costing us too much? It's how do we run NDIS so it's actually, really cost effective? Is the government doing it in a way that actually does cost a lot more? And when we talk about autism, that's some of the things that pop up. And the hard thing with the argument is we use these different topics to sort of polarise people. So autism is the major population of primary diagnosis.
Of course.
But most of the funding doesn't go to that population. It goes to people with physical disabilities.
And this is the hardest. This is really, it's a very tough topic to debate about. But look, thank you so much for both of you for contributing on that.